Hey, I thought I'd read some of Return to. Well, I keep wanting to call it Return to Oz. I'm going to read Ozma of Oz, and Return to Oz is the movie that's based on that book. But let me just finish getting set up here. Thanks for listening and hanging out. Okay, we're good to go. Thought I'd have a little change of scenery by sitting outside this time instead of in front of the fireplace. Maybe this weekend I'll get around to generating a new world. But for now, this is fine. Alright, so in just about less than a minute, I'll get started. Usually I ramble on and on, but today I just feel like jumping right into the book, the story. And I've never read this, I've kind of always wanted to. So this is kind of exciting for me because I love the movie. If you haven't seen Return to Oz, go watch it. It's amazing. And I've watched it recently within the last 2 years, and I think it holds up really well. I actually prefer that one to Wizard of Oz. Oh, I forgot to switch the video back. 1 second. Okay, I am back, so I don't need the BRB screen. So I'm just going to get right into it. So the book is by L. Frank Baum, who is the original author of The Wizard of Oz. And there's an introduction where he talks about how he got so many letters from people who enjoyed it, he figured he might as well just write another one. And so the movie is a very faithful adaptation. I'm just waiting for my TV to reboot. Should be up any minute here. Alright. There it goes. Okay. Let me just focus on the screen. I got a digital copy here, so there we are. Okay. Get comfy in my creaky chair. The name of the chapter 1, is The Girl in the Chicken Coop. The wind blew hard and joggled the water of the ocean, sending ripples across its surface. Then the wind pushed the edges of the ripples until they became waves, and shoved the waves around until they became billows. The billows rolled dreadfully high, higher even than the tops of houses. Some of them, indeed, rolled as high as tall trees, and seemed like mountains, and the gulfs between the great billows were like deep valleys. All this mad dashing and splashing of the waters of the big ocean, which the mischievous wind caused without any good reason whatever, resulted in a terrible storm, and a storm on the ocean is liable to cut many queer pranks and do a lot of damage. At the time the wind began to blow, a ship was sailing far out upon the waters. When the waves began to tumble and toss and to grow bigger and bigger, the ship rolled up and down and tipped sidewise, first one way and then the other, and was jostled around so roughly that even the sailormen had to hold fast to the ropes and railings to keep themselves from being swept away by the wind or pitched headlong into the sea. And the clouds were so thick in the sky that the sunlight couldn't get through them, so that the day grew dark as night, which added to the terrors of the storm. The captain of the ship was not afraid, because he had seen storms before, and had sailed his ship through them in safety. but he knew that his passengers would be in danger if they tried to stay on deck. So he put them all into the cabin and told them to stay there until after the storm was over, and to keep brave hearts and not be scared, and all would be well with them. Now, among these passengers was a little Kansas girl named Dorothy Gale, who was going with her Uncle Henry to Australia to visit some relatives they had never seen before. Uncle Henry, you must know, was not very well, because he had been working so hard on his Kansas farm that his health had given way and left him weak and nervous. So he left Aunt Em at home to watch after the hired men and to take care of the farm, while he traveled far away to Australia to visit his cousins and have a good rest. Dorothy was eager to go with him on this journey, and Uncle Henry thought she would be good company and help cheer him up, so he decided to take her along. The little girl was quite an experienced traveler, for she had once been carried away by a cyclone as far away from home as the marvelous land of Oz, and she had met with a good many adventures in that strange country before she managed to get back to Kansas again. So she wasn't easily frightened, whatever happened, and when the wind began to blow and howl and whistle, and the waves began to tumble and toss, our little girl didn't mind the uproar the least bit. "Of course we'll have to stay in the cabin," she said to Uncle Henry and the other passengers, "and keep as quiet as possible until the storm is over, for the captain says if we go on deck, we may be blown overboard." No one wanted to risk such an accident as that, you may be sure, so all the passengers stayed huddled up in the dark cabin, listening to the shrieking of the storm, and the creaking of the masts, and rigging, and trying to keep from bumping into one another when the ship turned sidewise. Dorothy had almost fallen asleep when she was aroused with a start to find that Uncle Henry was missing. She couldn't imagine where he had gone, and as he was not very strong, she began to worry about him, and to fear that he might have been careless enough to go on deck. In that case, he would be in great danger unless he instantly came down again. The fact was that Uncle Henry had gone to lie down in his little sleeping berth, but Dorothy did not know that. She only remembered that Aunt Em had cautioned her to take good care of her uncle, so, at once, she decided to go on deck and find him, in spite of the fact that the tempest was now worse than ever, and the ship was plunging in a really dreadful manner. Indeed, the little girl found it was as much as she could do to mount the stairs to the deck, and as soon as she got there, the wind struck her so fiercely that it almost tore away the skirt of her dress. Yet, Dorothy felt a sort of joyous excitement in defying the storm, and while she held fast to the railing, she peered around through the gloom and thought she saw the dim form of a man clinging to a mast not far away from her. This might be her uncle, so she called as loudly as she could, "Uncle Henry! Uncle Henry!" But the wind screeched and howled so madly that she scarce heard her own voice, and the man certainly failed to hear her, for he did not move. Dorothy decided she must go to him, so she made a dash forward, during a lull in the storm, to where a big square chicken coop had been lashed to the deck with ropes. She reached this place in safety, but no sooner had she seized fast hold of the slats in the big box in which the chickens were kept than the wind, as if enraged because the little girl dared to resist its power, suddenly redoubled its fury. With a scream like that of an angry giant, it tore away the ropes that held the coop and lifted it high into the air, with Dorothy still clinging to the slats. Around and over it whirled this way and that, and a few moments later the chicken coop dropped far away into the sea, where the big waves caught it and slid it uphill to a foaming crest, and then downhill into a deep valley, as if it were nothing more than a plaything to keep them amused. Dorothy had a good ducking, you may be sure, but she didn't lose her presence of mind even for a second. She kept tight hold of the stout slats, and as soon as she could get the water out of her eyes, she saw that the wind had ripped the cover from the coop, and the poor chickens were fluttering away in every direction, being blown by the wind until they looked like feather dusters without handles. The bottom of the coop was made of thick boards, so Dorothy found she was clinging to a sort of raft, with sides of slats, which readily bore up her weight. After coughing the water out of her throat and getting her breath again, she managed to climb over the slats and stand up the firm wooden bottom of the coop, which supported her easily enough. Why, I've got a ship of my own, she thought, more amused than frightened at her sudden change of condition. And then, as the coop climbed up to the top of a big wave, she looked eagerly around for the ship from which she had been blown. It was far, far away by this time. Perhaps no one on board had yet missed her or knew of her strange adventure. Down into a valley between the waves, the coop swept her. And when she climbed another crest, the ship looked like a toy boat. It was such a long way off. Soon it had entirely disappeared into the gloom, and then Dorothy gave a sigh of regret at parting with her Uncle Henry, and began to wonder what was going to happen to her next. Just now she was tossing on the bosom of a big ocean, with nothing to keep her afloat but a miserable wooden hen coop that had a plank bottom and slatted sides, through which the water constantly splashed and wetted her through to the skin. And there was nothing to eat when she became hungry, and she was sure to do before long, and no fresh water to drink and no dry clothes to put on. "Well, I declare," she exclaimed with a laugh, "you're in a pretty fix now, Dorothy Gale, I can tell you, and I haven't the least idea how you're going to get out of it." As if to add to her troubles, the night was now creeping on, and the gray clouds overhead changed to inky blackness. But the wind, as if satisfied at last with its mischievous pranks, stopped blowing this ocean and hurried away to another part of the world to blow something else, so that the waves, not being joggled anymore, began to quiet down and behave themselves. It was lucky for Dorothy, I think, that the storm subsided. Otherwise, brave though she was, I fear she might have perished. Many children, in her place, would have wept and given way to despair. But because Dorothy had encountered so many adventures and come safely through them, it did not occur to her at this time to be especially afraid. She was wet and uncomfortable, it is true, but after sighing that one sigh I told you of, she managed to recall some of her customary cheerfulness and decided to patiently await whatever her fate might be. By and by, the black clouds rolled away and showed a blue sky overhead, with a silver moon shining sweetly in the middle of it, and little stars winking merrily at Dorothy when she looked their way. The coop did not toss around any more, but rode the waves more gently, almost like a cradle rocking, so that the floor upon which Dorothy stood was no longer swept by water coming through the slats. Seeing this, and being quite exhausted by the excitement of the past few hours, the little girl decided that sleep would be the best thing to restore her strength, and the easiest way in which she could pass the time. The floor was damp, and she herself wringing wet. But fortunately, this was a warm climate, and she did not feel at all cold. She sat down in a corner of the coop, leaned her back against the slats, nodded at the friendly stars before she closed her eyes, and was asleep in half a minute. End of chapter 1. Just going to take a sip of my cider for a second here. Chapter 2 is titled The Yellow Hen. A strange noise awoke Dorothy, who opened her eyes to find that day had dawned and the sun was shining brightly in a clear sky. She had been dreaming that she was back in Kansas again, and playing in the old barnyard with the calves and pigs and chickens all around her. And at first, as she rubbed the sleep from her eyes, she really imagined she was there. Cut, 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 cut. Ah, here again was the strange noise that had awakened her. Surely it was a hen cackling, but her wide-open eyes first saw, through the slats of the coop, the blue waves of the ocean, now calm and placid. And her thoughts flew back to the past night, so full of danger and discomfort. Also, she began to remember that she was a waif of the storm, adrift upon a treacherous and unknown sea. What's that? Cried Dorothy, starting to her feet. Why, I've just laid an egg, that's all, replied a small but sharp and distinct voice, and looking around at her, the little girl discovered a yellow hen squatting in the opposite corner of the coop. Dear me, she exclaimed in surprise. Have you been here all night, too? Of course, answered the hen, fluttering her wings and yawning. When the coop blew away from the ship, I clung fast to this corner, with claws and beak, for I knew if I fell in the water, I'd surely be drowned. Indeed, I nearly drowned, as it was, with all that water washing over me. I never was so wet before in my life. Yes, agreed Dorothy. Yes, it was pretty wet for a time. I know. But, do you feel comfortable now? Oh, not very. The sun has helped to dry my feathers, as it has your dress, and I feel better since I laid my morning egg. But what's to become of us? I should like to know, afloat on this big pond. I'd like to know that, too, said Dorothy. But tell me, how does it happen that you are able to talk? I thought hens could only cluck and cackle. Why, as for that, answered the yellow hen thoughtfully, I've clucked and cackled all my life, and never spoken a word before this morning that I can remember. But when you asked me a question a minute ago, it seemed the most natural thing in the world to do was answer you. So I spoke, and I seem to keep on speaking, just as you and other human beings do. Strange, isn't it? Very, replied Dorothy. If we were in the land of Oz, I wouldn't think it so queer, because many of the animals can talk in that fairy country. But out here in the ocean, must be a good long way from Oz. How's my grammar? Asked the yellow hen anxiously. Do I speak quite properly, in your judgment? Yes, said Dorothy. You do very well, for a beginner. Oh, I'm glad to know that, continued the yellow hen, in a confidential tone. Because if one is going to talk, it's best to talk correctly. The red rooster has often said that my cluck and cackle were quite perfect, and now it's a comfort to know that I am talking properly. Yes, I'm beginning to get hungry, remarked Dorothy. It's breakfast time, but there's no breakfast. You may have my egg, said the yellow hen. That's my bird clock. It's 11 a.m. That is the white-breasted nuthatch. Okay, thank you, bird. So the yellow hen offered Dorothy her egg. So I don't care for it, you know. Oh, do you want to hatch it? Asked the little girl in surprise. No, indeed. I never care to hatch eggs unless I have a nice snug nest. In some quiet place, with a baker's dozen of eggs under me. That's 13, you know, and it's a lucky number for hens, so you may as well eat the egg. Oh, well, I couldn't possibly eat it unless it was cooked, exclaimed Dorothy. But I'm much obliged to your kindness just the same. Oh, don't mention it, my dear, answered the hen, calmly, and began preening her feathers. For a moment, Dorothy stood looking out over the wide sea. She was still thinking of the egg, though, so presently she asked, "Why do you lay eggs when you don't expect to hatch them?" "It's a habit I have," replied the yellow hen. "It has always been my pride to lay a fresh egg every morning, except when I'm molting. I never feel like having my morning cackle till the egg is properly laid, and without the chance to cackle, I would not be happy." "It is strange," said the girl, reflectively. "But as I'm not a hen, I can't be expected to understand that." "Certainly not, my dear." Then Dorothy fell silent again. The yellow hen was some company, and a bit of comfort, too. But it was dreadfully lonely out on the big ocean, nevertheless. After a time, the hen flew up and perched upon the topmost slat of the coop, which was a little above Dorothy's head when she was sitting upon the bottom, and she had been doing so for the moments past. "Why, we are not far from land," exclaimed the hen. "Where? Where is it?" cried Dorothy, jumping up in great excitement. "Over there a little way," answered the hen, nodding her head in a certain direction. "We seem to be drifting toward it, so that before noon we ought to find ourselves upon dry land again." "Oh, I shall like that," said Dorothy, with a little sigh, for her feet and legs were still wetted now, and now and then by the seawater that came through the open slats. "Oh, so shall I," answered her companion. "There is nothing so miserable in the world as a wet hen." The land, which they seemed to be rapidly approaching, since it grew more distinct every minute, was quite beautiful as viewed by the little girl in the floating hen coop. Next to the water was a broad beach of white sand and gravel, and farther back were several rocky hills, while beyond these appeared a strip of green trees that marked the edge of a forest. But there were no houses to be seen, nor any sign of people who might inhabit this unknown land. "I hope we shall find something to eat," said Dorothy, looking eagerly at the pretty beach toward which they drifted. "It's long past breakfast time now." "I'm a trifle hungry myself," declared the yellow hen. "Well, why don't you eat the egg?" asked the child. "You don't need to have your food cooked, as I do." "Do you take me for a cannibal?" cried the hen, indignantly. "I do not know what I have said or done that leads you to insult me." "I beg your pardon. I'm sure Mrs. By the way, may I inquire your name, ma'am?" asked the little girl. "My name is Bill," said the yellow hen, somewhat gruffly. "Bill? Why, that's a boy's name." "Well, what difference does that make?" "Well, you're a lady hen, aren't you?" "Of course. But when I was first hatched out, no one could tell whether I was going to be a hen or a rooster. So the little boy at the farm where I was born called me Bill, and made a pet of me because I was the only yellow chicken in the whole brood. When I grew up, he found that I didn't crow and fight as all rude roosters do. He did not think to change my name, and every creature in the barnyard, as well, and the people in the house knew me as Bill. So, Bill I've always been called, and Bill is my name." "Oh, but it's all wrong, you know," declared Dorothy earnestly. "And if you don't mind, I shall call you Billina. Putting the Ina on the end makes it a girl's name, you see." "Oh, I don't mind in the least," returned the Yellow Hen. "It doesn't matter at all what you call me, so long as I know the name means me." "Well, very well, Billina. My name is Dorothy Gale. Just Dorothy to my friends and Miss Gale to strangers. You may call me Dorothy, if you like." "We're getting very near the shore. Do you suppose it is too deep for me to wade the rest of the way?" Wait a few minutes longer. The sunshine is warm and pleasant, and we're in no hurry." "Yes, but my feet are all wet and soggy," said the girl. "My dress is dry enough, but I won't feel real comfortable till I get my feet dried." She waited, however, as the hen advised, and before long the big wooden coop grated gently on the sandy beach, and the dangerous voyage was over. It did not take the castaways long to reach the shore, you may be sure. The Yellow Hen flew to the sands at once, but Dorothy had to climb over the high slats. Still, for a country girl, that was not much of a feat, and as soon as she was safe ashore, Dorothy drew off her wet shoes and stockings and spread them upon the sun-warmed beach to dry. Oh, my cat wants to say hi. "Hey, kitty, kitty, what are you doing? Am I keeping you awake?" Okay. Where was I? Then she sat down and watched Billina, who was pick-pecking away with her sharp bill in the sand and gravel, when she scratched up and turned over with her strong claws. "What are you doing?" asked Dorothy. "I'm getting my breakfast, of course," murmured the hen, busily pecking away. "Oh, what do you find?" inquired the girl curiously. "Oh, some fat red ants, some sandbugs, and once in a while a tiny crab. They are very sweet and nice, I assure you." "Oh, how dreadful!" exclaimed Dorothy in a shocked voice. "What is dreadful?" asked the hen, lifting her head to gaze with one bright eye at her companion. "Why, eating live things and horrid bugs and crawly ants. You ought to be ashamed of yourself." "Goodness me," returned the hen, in a puzzled tone. "How queer you are, Dorothy. Live things are much fresher and more wholesome than dead ones, and you humans eat all sorts of dead creatures." "We don't," said Dorothy. "You do indeed," answered Billina. "You eat lambs and sheep and cows and pigs and even chickens." "Well, yes, but we cook 'em," said Dorothy triumphantly. "And what difference does that make?" "Well, a good deal," said the girl in a graver tone. "I just can't explain the difference, but it's there. And, anyhow, we never eat such dreadful things as bugs." "But you eat the chickens that eat the bugs," retorted the Yellow Hen with an odd cackle. "So you are just as bad as we chickens are." This made Dorothy thoughtful. What Billina said was true enough, and it almost took away her appetite for breakfast. As for the Yellow Hen, she continued to peck away at the sand busily and seemed quite contented with her bill of fare. Finally, down near the water's edge, Billina stuck her bill deep into the sand, and then drew back and shivered. "Ow!" she cried. "Oh, I struck metal that time, and it nearly broke my beak." "It's probably a rock," said Dorothy carelessly. "Nonsense! I know a rock from metal, I guess," said the hen. "There's a different feel to it." "Oh, but there couldn't be any metal on this wild, deserted seashore," persisted the girl. "Where's the place? I'll dig it up and prove you I'm right." Billina showed her the place where she had stubbed her bill, as she expressed it, and Dorothy dug away the sand until she felt something hard. Then, thrusting in her hand, she pulled the thing out and discovered it to be a large-sized golden key, rather old, but still bright and of perfect shape. "What did I tell you?" cried the hen, with a cackle of triumph. "Can I tell metal when I bump into it, or is the thing a rock?" "Well, it's metal, sure enough," answered the child, gazing thoughtfully at the curious thing she had found. "I think it is pure gold, and it must have lain hidden in the sand for a long time. How do you suppose it came there, Billina? And what do you suppose this mysterious key unlocks?" "Oh, I can't say," replied the hen. "You ought to know more about locks and keys than I do." Dorothy glanced around. There was no sign of any house in that part of the country, and she reasoned that every key must fit a lock and every lock must have a purpose. Perhaps the key had been lost by somebody who lived far away but had wandered onto this very shore. Musing on these things, the girl put the key in the pocket of her dress and then slowly drew on her shoes and stockings, which the sun had fully dried. "I believe, Billina," she said, "I'll have a look around and see if I can find some breakfast." End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 is titled Letters in the Sand. Taking a sip of my apple cider. Okay, and continuing. Walking a little way back from the water's edge, toward the grove of the trees, Dorothy came to a flat stretch of white sand that seemed to have queer signs marked upon its surface, just as one would write upon sand with a stick. "What does it say?" she asked the yellow hen, who trotted along beside her in a rather dignified fashion. "How should I know?" returned the hen. "I cannot read." "Oh, can't you?" "Certainly not. I've never been to school, you know." "Well, I have," admitted Dorothy, "but the letters are big and far apart, and it's hard to spell out the words." But she looked at each letter carefully and finally discovered that these words were written in the sand. "Beware the Wheelers." "That's rather strange," declared the hen, when Dorothy had read aloud the words. "What do you suppose the Wheelers are?" Folks that wheel, I guess. They must have wheelbarrows, or baby cabs, or handcarts," said Dorothy. "Perhaps they're automobiles," suggested the yellow hen. "There is no need to beware of baby cabs and wheelbarrows. But automobiles are dangerous things. Several of my friends have been run over by them." "It can't be automobiles," replied the girl, "for this is a new, wild country, without even trolley cars or telephones. The people here haven't been discovered yet, I'm sure. That is, if there are any people. So, I don't believe there can be any automobiles, Billina." "Well, perhaps not," admitted the yellow hen. "Where are you going now?" "Over to those trees to see if I can find some fruit or nuts," answered Dorothy. She tramped across the sand, skirting the foot of one of the little rocky hills that stood near. Sorry. You're a good boy, Mike. What are you doing? I'm right here. You're restless, huh? My kitten just brought in his, not the teddy bear this time, his snow monkey. He has two monkeys, a red and a white one, and he's got the white snow monkey out right now. I think he wants me to play with them, or he just wants attention. Okay. So she reached the edge of the forest. At first, she was greatly disappointed because the nearer trees were all punita, or cottonwood or eucalyptus, and bore no fruits or nuts at all. But by and by, when she was almost in despair, the little girl came upon 2 trees that promised to furnish her with plenty of food. One was quite full of square paper boxes, which grew in clusters on all the limbs, and upon the biggest and ripest boxes the word lunch could be read, in neat raised letters. This tree seemed to bear all the year round, for there were lunchbox blossoms on some of the branches, and on others tiny little lunchboxes that were as yet quite green and evidently not fit to eat until they had grown bigger. The leaves of this tree were all paper napkins, and it presented a very pleasing appearance to the hungry little girl. But the tree next to the lunchbox tree was even more wonderful, for it bore quantities of tin dinner pails, which were so full and heavy that the stout branches bent underneath their weight. Some were small and dark brown in color. Those larger were of a dull tin color. But the really ripe ones were pails of bright tin that shone and glistened beautifully in the rays of sunshine that touched them. Dorothy was delighted, and even the yellow hen acknowledged that she was surprised. The little girl stood on tiptoe and picked one of the nicest and biggest lunch boxes, and then she sat down upon the ground and eagerly opened it. Inside she found, nicely wrapped in white papers, a ham sandwich, a piece of sponge cake, a pickle, a slice of new cheese, and an apple. Each thing had a separate stem, and so she had to pick each off the side of the box. But Dorothy found them all to be delicious, and she ate every bit of luncheon in the box before she had finished. "Well, lunch isn't exactly breakfast," she said to Billina, who sat beside her curiously watching. "But when one is hungry, one can eat even supper in the morning and not complain." "I hope your lunchbox was perfectly ripe," observed the yellow hen, in an anxious tone. "So much sickness is caused by eating green things." "Oh, I'm sure it was ripe," declared Dorothy. "All, that is, except the pickle, and a pickle just has to be green, Billina. But everything tasted perfectly splendid, and I'd rather have it than a church picnic. And now I think I'll pick a dinner pail to have when I get hungry again, and then we'll start out and explore the country and see where we are." "Haven't you any idea what country this is?" inquired Billina. "None at all. But listen, I'm quite sure it's a fair country, or such things as lunchboxes and dinner pails wouldn't be growing upon trees. Besides, Billina, being a hen, you wouldn't be able to talk in any civilized country, like Kansas, where no fairies live at all." "Oh, perhaps we're in the land of Oz," said the hen thoughtfully. No, that can't be," answered the little girl, "because I've been to the land of Oz, and it's all surrounded by a horrid desert that no one can cross." "Then how did you get away from there again?" asked Billina. "Well, I had a pair of silver shoes that carried me through the air, but I lost them," said Dorothy. "Ah, indeed," remarked the yellow hen in a tone of unbelief. "Anyhow," resumed the girl, "there is no seashore near the land of Oz, so this must surely be some other fairy country." While she was speaking, she selected a bright and pretty dinner pail that seemed to have a stout handle, and picked it from its branch. Then, accompanied by the yellow hen, she walked out of the shadow of the trees toward the seashore. They were part way across the sands when Billina suddenly cried, in a voice of terror, "What's that?" Dorothy turned quickly around and saw coming out of a path that led from between the trees the most peculiar person her eyes had ever beheld. It had the form of a man, except that it walked, or rather rolled, upon all fours, and its legs were the same length as its arms, giving them the appearance of the four legs of a beast. Yet it was no beast that Dorothy had discovered, for the person was clothed most gorgeously in embroidered garments of many colors, and wore a straw hat perched jauntily upon the side of its head. But it differed from human beings in this respect, that instead of hands and feet, there grew at the end of its arms and legs round wheels, and by means of these wheels it rolled very swiftly over the level ground. Afterward, Dorothy found that these odd wheels were of the same hard substance that our fingernails and toenails are composed of, and she also learned that the creatures of this strange race were born in this queer fashion. But when our little girl first caught sight of the first individual of a race that was destined to cause her a lot of trouble, she had an idea that the brilliantly clothed personage was on roller skates, which were attached to his hands as well as to his feet. "Run!" screamed the yellow hen, fluttering away in great fright. "It's a wheeler!" "A wheeler!" exclaimed Dorothy. "What can that be?" "Don't you remember the warning in the sand? Beware the wheelers! Run, I tell you! Run!" So Dorothy ran, and the wheeler gave a sharp, wild cry and came after her in full chase. Looking over her shoulder as she ran, the girl now saw a great procession of wheelers emerging from the forest. Dozens and dozens of them, all clad in splendid, tight-fitting garments, and all rolling swiftly toward her and uttering their wild, strange cries. "They're sure to catch us," panted the girl, who was still carrying the heavy dinner pail she had picked. "I can't run much farther, Billina." "Climb up this hill, quick," said the hen, and Dorothy found she was very near to the heap of loose and jagged rocks they had passed on their way to the forest. The yellow hen was even now fluttering among the rocks, and Dorothy followed as best she could, half climbing and half tumbling up the rough and rugged steep. She was none too soon, for the foremost wheeler reached the hill a moment after her, but while the girl scrambled up the rocks, the creature stopped short with howls of rage and disappointment. Now, Dorothy heard the yellow hen laughing in her cackling henny way. "Don't hurry, my dear," cried Billina. "They can't follow us among these rocks, so we're safe enough now." Dorothy stopped at once and sat down upon a broad boulder, for she was all out of breath. The rest of the wheelers had now reached the foot of the hill, but it was evident that their wheels would not roll upon the rough and jagged rocks, and therefore they were helpless to follow Dorothy and the hen to where they had taken refuge. But they circled all around the little hill, so the child and Billina were fast prisoners and could not come down without being captured. Then the creatures shook their front wheels at Dorothy in a threatening manner, and it seemed they were able to speak as well as to make their dreadful outcries, for several of them shouted, "We'll get you in there, never fear, and when we do get you, we'll tear you into little bits." "Why are you so cruel to me?" asked Dorothy. "I'm a stranger in your country, and have done you no harm." "No harm," cried one who seemed to be their leader. "Did you not pick our lunch boxes and dinner pails? Have you not stolen dinner pails still in your hand?" "Well, I only picked one of each," she answered. "I was hungry, and I didn't know the trees were yours." "That is no excuse," retorted the leader, who was clothed in a most gorgeous suit. "It is the law here that whoever picks a dinner pail without our permission must die immediately." "Oh, don't you believe him," said Bellina. "I'm sure the trees do not believe these belong to these awful creatures. They are fit for any mischief, and it's my opinion they would try to kill us just the same if you hadn't picked a dinner pail." "You know what, I think so too," agreed Dorothy. "But what shall we do now?" "Stay where we are," advised the Yellow Hen. "We're safe from the Wheelers until we starve to death, anyhow. And before that time comes, a good many things can happen." End of chapter 3. I'm going to have a sip of my tea. I think my cat is calmed down now. He wants some attention. He's over in the hallway. He's chewing on his claw. It's about his nap time, but I think I'm keeping him awake. But that's okay. Well, now he's twisting around on his back. He's very twisty. He likes to be on his back. In fact, I can't hold him without him. Anytime I pick him up, he'll start turning over, and he forces me to hold him on his back. So I've had to learn how to hold him on his back while I hold him, which was easy, and it got more difficult when he was a baby. It was easy, and he got heavier and heavier. He's very muscular. I took him to the vet recently, and they were telling me he was a little bit overweight, but he's not overweight. He's just all muscle, so he weighs more than an average cat. But so he's a heavy cat, and he's still not full grown. He's playing with his tunnel. All right. Well, he's enjoying himself. So the name of chapter 4 is Tick-Tock, the Machine Man. I've always liked Tick-Tock, even though I've never read this before. I've seen the movie so many times. It's one of my favorites. I have a tea kettle. My tea kettle reminds me of Tick-Tock because it's the same color and it's got the same shape of his head. Alright, well, I'm spoiling it before I even read it. But anyways, okay. Well, he's a machine man, so there you go. Okay. Chapter 4, Tick-Tock, the Machine Man. After an hour or so, most of the band of Wheelers rolled back into the forest, leaving only 3 of their number to guard the hill. These curled themselves up like big dogs and pretended to go to sleep on the sands, but neither Dorothy nor Bellina were fooled by this trick. So they remained in security among the rocks and paid no attention to their cunning enemies. Finally, the hen, fluttering over the mound, exclaimed, "Why, here's a path." So Dorothy at once clambered to where Bellina sat. And there, sure enough, was a smooth path cut between the rocks. It seemed to wind around the mound from top to bottom, like a corkscrew, twisting here and there between the rough boulders, but always remaining level and easy to walk upon. Indeed, Dorothy wondered at first why the Wheelers did not roll up this path, but when she followed it to the foot of the mound, she found that several big pieces of rock had been placed directly across the end of the way, thus preventing anyone outside from seeing it, and also preventing the Wheelers from using it to climb up the mound. Then Dorothy walked back up the path and followed it until she came to the very top of the hill, where a solitary rock, a round rock, stood that was bigger than any of the other things surrounding it. The path came to an end just beside this great rock, and for a moment it puzzled the girl to know why the path had been made at all. But the hen, who had been gravely following her around, and was now perched upon a point of rock behind Dorothy, suddenly remarked, "It looks like something a door, doesn't it?" "Oh, what? It looks like a door?" inquired the child. "Why, that crack in the rock, just facing you," replied Billina, whose little round eyes were very sharp and seemed to see everything. "It runs up one side and down the other, and across the top and the bottom." "What does?" "Why, the crack. So I think it must be a door of rock, although I do not see any hinges." "Oh, yeah," said Dorothy, now observing for the first time the crack in the rock. "And isn't this a keyhole, Billina?" pointing to a round, deep hole at one side of the door. "Oh, of course. If we only had the key, now we could unlock it and see what is there," replied the yellow hen. "Maybe it's a treasure chamber full of diamonds and rubies, or heaps of shining gold, or—" "Well, that reminds me," said Dorothy, "of the golden key I picked up on the shore. Do you think that would fit this keyhole, Billina?" "Oh, try it and see," suggested the hen. So Dorothy searched in the pocket of her dress and found the golden key, and when she had put it into the hole of the rock and turned it, a sudden sharp snap was heard. Then, with a solemn creak that made the shivers run down the child's back, the face of the rock fell outward, like a door on hinges, and revealed a small, dark chamber just inside. "Good gracious," cried Dorothy, shrinking back as far as the narrow path would let her. For, standing within the narrow chamber of rock, was the form of a man, or at least it seemed like a man in the dim light. He was only about as tall as Dorothy herself, and his body was round as a ball and made out of burnished copper. Also his head and limbs were copper, and these were jointed or hinged to his body in a peculiar way, with metal caps over the joints, like the armor worn by knights in days of old. He stood perfectly still, and where the light struck upon his form it glittered, as if made of pure gold. "Don't be frightened," called Billina from her perch. "It isn't alive." I see it isn't," replied the girl, drawing a long breath. "It is only made out of copper, like the old kettle in the barnyard at home," continued the hen, turning her head first to one side and then to the other, so that both her little round eyes could examine the object. "Once," said Dorothy, "I knew a man made out of tin, who was a woodman named Nick Chopper. But he was alive as we are, 'cause he was born a real man, and got his tin body a little at a time. Well, first a leg, and then a finger, and then an ear, for the reason that he had so many accidents with his axe, and cut himself up in a very careless manner." "Oh," said the hen with a sniff, as if she did not believe the story. "But this copper man," continued Dorothy, looking at it with big eyes, "this copper man is not alive at all, and I wonder what it was made for, and why it was locked up in this queer place." "That is a mystery," remarked the hen, twisting her head to arrange her wing feathers with her bill. Dorothy stepped inside the little room to get a back view of the copper man, and in this way discovered a printed card that hung between his shoulders. it being suspended from a small copper peg at the back of his neck. She unfastened this card and returned to the path where the light was better, and sat herself down upon a slab of rock to read the printing. "What does it say?" asked the hen curiously. Dorothy read the card aloud, spelling out the big words with some difficulty, and this is what she read. Smith and Tinkers. Patent double action, extra responsive. Thought creating, perfect talking. Mechanical man. Fitted with our special clockwork attachment. Thinks, speaks, acts, and does everything but live. Manufactured only at our works at Evna, land of Ev. All infringements will be promptly prosecuted according to law. "Oh, how queer," said the yellow hen. "Do you think that is all true, my dear?" "I don't know," answered Dorothy, who had more to read. "Well, listen to this, Billina. Directions for using. For thinking, wind the clockwork man under his left arm, marked number 1. For speaking, wind the clockwork man under his right arm, marked number 2. For walking and action, wind clockwork in the middle of his back, marked number 3. N.B. This mechanism is guaranteed to work perfectly for 1,000 years. "Well, I declare," gasped the yellow hen in amazement. "If the copper man can do half of these things, he is a very wonderful machine. But I suppose it is all humbug, like so many other patented articles." "We might wind him up," suggested Dorothy, "and see what he'll do." "Where's the key to the clockwork?" asked Billina. "Hanging on the peg where I found the card." "Oh, then," said the hen, "let us try him, and find out if he'll go. He is warranted for 1,000 years, it seems. But we do not know how long he has been standing inside this rock." Dorothy had already taken the clock key from the peg. Which shall I wind up first?" she asked, looking again at the directions on the card. "Number 1, I should think," returned Billina. "That makes him think, doesn't it?" Yes," said Dorothy, and wound up number 1, under the left arm. "He doesn't seem any different," remarked the hen critically. "Well, why, of course not. He is only thinking now," said Dorothy. "I wonder what he's thinking about." "I'll wind up his talk, and then perhaps he can tell us," said the girl. So she wound up number 2. And immediately the clockwork man said, without moving any part of his body except his lips, "Good morning, little girl. Good morning, Mrs. Hen." The words sounded a little hoarse and creaky, and they were uttered all in the same tone, without any change of expression whatever. But both Dorothy and Billina understood them perfectly. "Good morning, sir," they answered politely. "Thank you for rescuing me," continued the machine, in the same monotonous voice, which seemed to be worked by a bellows inside of him, like the tiny little toy lambs and cats the children squeeze, so that they will make a noise. "Don't mention it," answered Dorothy. And then, being very curious, she asked, "How did you come to be locked up in this place?" "It is a long story," replied the copper man, "but I will tell it to you briefly. I was purchased from Smith and Tinker, my manufacturers, by a cruel king of Ev, named Evaldo, who used to beat all his servants until they died. However, he was not able to kill me because I was not alive, and one must first live in order to die, so that all his beatings did me no harm, and merely kept my copper body well polished. This cruel king had a lovely wife and 10 beautiful children, 5 boys and 5 girls. But in a fit of anger he sold them all to the Gnome King, who by means of his magic arts changed them all into other forms and put them in his underground palace to ornament the room. Afterward, the king of Ev regretted to his wicked action and tried to get his wife and children away from the Gnome King, but without avail. So, in despair, he locked me up in this rock, threw the key into the ocean, and then jumped in after it and was drowned. "Oh, how very dreadful!" exclaimed Dorothy. "It is, indeed," said the machine. "When I found myself imprisoned, I shouted for help until my voice ran down. And then I walked back and forth in this little room until my action ran down. And then I stood still and thought until my thoughts ran down. After that, I remember nothing until you wound me up again." "It's a very, very wonderful story," said Dorothy, "and proves that the land of Ev is really a fairyland, as I thought it was." "Of course it is," answered the Copper Man. "I do not suppose such a perfect machine as I am could be made in any place but a fairyland." "I've never seen one in Kansas," said Dorothy. "But where did you get the key to unlock this door?" asked the clockwork voice. "I found it on the shore, where it was probably washed up by the waves," she answered. "And now, sir, if you don't mind, I'll wind up your action." "That will please me very much," said the machine. So she wound up number 3. And at once, the Copper Man, in a somewhat stiff and jerky fashion, walked out of the rocky cavern, took off his copper hat, and bowed politely, and then kneeled before Dorothy. Said he, "From this time forth I am your obedient servant. Whatever you command, that I will do willingly, if you keep me wound up." "What is your name?" she asked. "Tick-Tock," he replied. "My former master gave me that name because my clockwork always ticks when it is wound up." "I can hear it now," said the yellow hen. "So can I," said Dorothy. And then she added, with some anxiety, "You don't strike, do you?" "No," answered Tick-Tock. "And there is no alarm connected with my machinery. I can tell the time, though, by speaking, and as I never sleep, I can waken you at any hour you wish to get up in the morning." "Oh, that's nice," said the little girl. "Only I never wish to get up in the morning." "Oh, you can sleep until I lay my egg," said the yellow hen. "Then, when I cackle, Tick-Tock will know it is time to waken you." "Do you lay your egg very early?" asked Dorothy. About 8 o'clock," said Billina. "And everybody ought to be up by that time, I'm sure." End of chapter 4. So, before I move on to chapter 5, I'm just going to ramble on meaninglessly for 1 minute, hopefully not 2. I'm looking at the clock now. Okay. I got 1 minute to go. So I noticed last stream, I was like getting dizzy I'd read for a while, and like I would get dizzy, and my cognitive function would kind of degrade a bit. And I thought it was just from sitting in a chair. I'm like, well, I spend plenty of time like on the couch and in a chair. It has to be something else. And then I realized it was my breathing. So, anyways, I'm just kind of talking to myself. I doubt anyone is overly interested about hearing about it, but that's note to self as I'm working on my breathing a bit more. And so far it's been working out. So if you hear me like if there's a long pause, mostly I'm just catching my breath, most likely. Either that or like sometimes I just like to slow down so I can visualize things as I read them, which is always the way I've read. I mean, yeah, I read at a pace where I can visualize what I'm reading. That's just the way I like to do it. Alright, that was a minute. Chapter 5 is titled Dorothy Opens the Dinner Pail. So yeah, I haven't had to get up or anything. I don't feel tired or anything, so good. Now that I've got the breathing part down, that makes a big difference. Okay. Dorothy opens the pail. The dinner pail. "Now, Tick-Tock," said Dorothy. "The first thing to be done is to find a way for us to escape from these rocks. The Wheelers are down below, and they threatened to kill us." "There is no reason to be afraid of the Wheelers," said Tick-Tock, the words coming more slowly than before. "Oh, why not?" she asked. "Because they are... He gave a sort of gurgle and stopped short, waving his hands frantically until suddenly he became motionless, with one arm in the air and the other held stiffly before him with all the copper fingers of the hand spread out like a fan. "Dear me," said Dorothy in a frightened tone. "What can the matter be?" "He's run down, I suppose," said the hen calmly. "You couldn't have wound him up very tight." "I didn't know how much to wind him," replied the girl. "But I'll try to do better next time." She ran around the copper man to take the key from the peg at the back of his neck, but it was not there. "It's gone!" cried Dorothy in dismay. "What's gone?" asked Billina. "The key." "Probably fell off when he made that low bow to you," returned the hen. "Look around and see if you cannot find it again." Dorothy looked, and the hen helped her, and by the girl discovered the clock key, which had fallen into a crack of the rock. At once she wound up Tick-Tock's voice, taking care to give the key as many turns as it would go around. She found this quite a task, as you may imagine if you have ever tried to wind a clock, but the machine man's first words were to assure Dorothy that he would now run for at least 24 hours. "You did not wind me much at first," he calmly said. "And I told you that long story about King Evaldo, so it is no wonder that I ran down." She next rewound the action clockwork, and then Billina advised her to carry the key to Tick-Tock in her pocket so it would not get lost again. "And now," said Dorothy, when all this was accomplished, "tell me what you were going to say about the Wheelers." "Why, they are nothing to be frightened at," said the machine. "They try to make folks believe that they are very terrible, but, as a matter of fact, the Wheelers are harmless enough to anyone that dares to fight them. They might try to hurt a little girl like you, perhaps, because they are very mischievous. But if I had a club, they would run away as soon as they saw me." "Haven't you a club?" asked Dorothy. "No," said Tick-Tock. "And you wouldn't find such a thing among these rocks either," declared the yellow hen. "Well, then what shall we do?" asked the girl. wind up my ThinkWorks tightly, and I will try to think of some other plan," said Tick-Tock. So Dorothy rewound his thought machinery, and while he was thinking, she decided to eat her dinner. Billina was already pecking away at the cracks in the rocks to find something to eat, so Dorothy sat down and opened her tin dinner pail. In the cover, she found a small tank that was full of very nice lemonade. It was covered by a cup, which might also, when removed, be used to drink the lemonade from. Within the pail were 3 slices of turkey, 2 slices of cold tongue, some lobster salad, 4 slices of bread and butter, a small custard pie, an orange, and 9 large strawberries, and some nuts and raisins. Singularly enough, the nuts in this dinner pail grew already cracked, so that Dorothy had no trouble in picking out their meats to eat. She spread the feast upon the rock beside her and began her dinner, first offering some of it to Tick-Tock, who declined because, as he said, he was merely a machine. Afterward, she offered to share with Billina, but the hen murmured something about dead things and said she preferred her bugs and ants. "Do the lunchbox trees and the dinner pail trees belong to the Wheelers?" the child asked Tick-Tock, while engaged in eating her meal. "Of course not," he answered. "They belong to the royal family of Ev. Only, of course, there is no royal family just now, because King Evaldo jumped into the sea and his wife and 10 children have been transformed by the Gnome King. So, there is no one to rule the land of Ev that I can think of. Perhaps it is for this reason that the Wheelers claim the trees for their own, and pick the luncheons and dinners to eat themselves. But they belong to the king, and you will find the royal E stamped upon the bottom of every dinner pail." Dorothy turned the pail over, and at once discovered the royal mark upon it, as Tick-Tock said. "Are the Wheelers the only folks living in the land of Ev?" inquired the girl. "No, they only inhabit a small portion of it, just back of the woods," replied the machine. "But they have always been mischievous and impertinent, and my old master, King Evaldo, used to carry a whip with him when he walked out, to keep the creatures in order. When I was first made, the Wheelers tried to run over me and butt me with their heads, but they soon found I was built of too solid a material for them to injure." "You do seem very durable," said Dorothy. "Who made you?" "The firm of Smith and Tinker, in the town of Evna, where the royal palace stands," answered Tick-Tock. "Do they make many of you?" asked the child. "No, I am the only automatic mechanical man they ever completed," he replied. "They were very wonderful inventors, were my makers, and quite artistic in all they did." "Oh, I am sure of that," said Dorothy. "Do they live in the town of Evna now?" "They are both gone," replied the machine. "Mr. Smith was an artist, as well as an inventor, and he painted a picture of a river which was so natural that, as he was reaching across it to paint some flowers on the opposite bank, he fell into the water and was drowned." "Oh, I'm sorry for that," exclaimed the little girl. "Mr. Tinker," continued Tick-Tock, "made a ladder so tall that he could rest the end of it against the moon, while he stood on the highest rung and picked the little stars to set in the points of the king's crown. But when he got to the moon, Mr. Tinker found it such a lovely place that he decided to live there. So he pulled up the ladder after him, and we have never seen him since." "Oh, he must have been a great loss to this country," said Dorothy, who was by this time eating her custard pie. "He was," acknowledged Tick-Tock. "Also, he is a great loss to me. For if I should get out of order, I do not know of anyone able to repair me, because I am so complicated. You have no idea how full of machinery I am." "Oh, I can imagine it," said Dorothy readily. "And now," continued the machine, "I must stop talking and begin thinking again of a way to escape from this rock." So he turned halfway around in order to think without being disturbed. "The best thinker I ever knew," said Dorothy to the Yellow Hen, "was a scarecrow." "Nonsense," snapped Billina. "It's true," declared Dorothy. "I met him in the Land of Oz, and he traveled with me to the city of the Great Wizard of Oz, so as to get some brains, for his head was only stuffed with straw. But it seemed to me that he thought just as well before he got his brains as he did afterward." "Do you expect me to believe all that rubbish about the Land of Oz?" inquired Billina, who seemed a little cross, perhaps because bugs were scarce. "What rubbish?" asked the child, who was now finishing her nuts and raisins. "Why, your impossible stories about animals that can talk, and a Tin Woodman who is alive, and a Scarecrow who can think." "Well, they are all there," said Dorothy, "for I have seen them." "I don't believe it," cried the hen, with a toss of her head. "Well, that's 'cause you're so ignorant," replied the girl, who was a little offended at her friend Billina's speech. "In the Land of Oz," remarked Tick-Tock, turning toward them, "anything is possible, for it is a wonderful fairy country." "There, Billina, what did I say?" cried Dorothy. And then she turned to the machine and asked in an eager tone, "Do you know the Land of Oz, Tick-Tock?" "No, but I have heard about it," said the Copper Man, "for it is only separated from this Land of Ev by a broad desert." Dorothy clapped her hands together delightedly. "Oh, I'm glad of that," she exclaimed. "Oh, it makes me quite happy to be so near my old friends. The Scarecrow I told you of, Billina, is the king of the Land of Oz." Pardon me, he is not the king now," said Tick-Tock. "Well, he was when I left there," declared Dorothy. "I know," said Tick-Tock. "But there was a revolution in the Land of Oz, and the Scarecrow was deposed by a soldier woman named General Ginger. And then Ginger was deposed by a little girl named Ozma, who was the rightful heir to the throne, and now rules the land under the title Ozma of Oz." Oh, that is news to me," said Dorothy thoughtfully. "But I suppose lots of things have happened since I left the Land of Oz. I wonder what's become of the Scarecrow, and the Tin Woodman, and the Cowardly Lion. I wonder who this girl Ozma is, for I have never heard of her before." But Tick-Tock did not reply to this. He had turned around again to resume his thinking. Dorothy packed the rest of the food back into the pail, so as not to be wasteful of good things. And the Yellow Hen forgot her dignity far enough to pick up all of the scattered crumbs, which she ate rather greedily, although she had so lately pretended to despise the things that Dorothy preferred as food. By this time, Tick-Tock approached them with his stiff bow. Be kind enough to follow me, he said. Wow, it's been an hour already? Oh, that went by really fast. Let's see, the hands are covering up the bird, so I can't see. Oh, I think it's the house wren. I think that's what that one is, the house wren. Okay. Well, that was a quick hour. Be kind enough to follow me, he said, and I will lead you away from here to the town of Ebna, where you will become more comfortable, and also I will protect you from the Wheelers. All right, answered Dorothy promptly. I'm ready. End of chapter 5. So this is kind of a short one. I'm on page 52 out of 200. But I skipped the introduction, which is probably at least 10 pages. So not a terribly long book. So yeah, that's good. And who knows, maybe I'll start reading The Hobbit. So yeah, The Hobbit will still take a while. I don't even know how long The Lord of the Rings is going to take. That'll take a really long time. But anyways, reading this one right now. I'll keep going for now. Like I said, because I'm being aware of my breathing, I have not felt dizzy at all, so I feel fine. We'll see how long I can go. Anyways, the name of chapter 6 is The Heads of... Oh, hold on. How is this pronounced? The Heads of Languedir. So far it's pretty accurate to the movie, or vice versa. So this is going on to like the creepiest part of the movie. There's a part of the movie where if you're a kid and watching, it's pretty scary. So I can see where this part is going. This is the creepy part. Chapter 6. The Heads of Languedir. They walked slowly down the path between the rocks. Tick-Tock going first, Dorothy following him, and the yellow hen trotting along last of all. At the foot of the path, the copper man leaned down and tossed aside with ease the rocks that encumbered the way. Then he turned to Dorothy and said, "Let me carry your dinner pail." She placed it in his right hand at once, and the copper fingers closed firmly over the stout handle. Then the little procession marched out upon the level sands. As soon as the 3 Wheelers who were guarding the mound saw them, they began to shout their wild cries and rolled swiftly toward the little group, as if to capture them or bar their way. But when the foremost had approached near enough, Tick-Tock swung the tin dinner pail and struck the Wheeler a sharp blow over its head with the queer weapon. Perhaps it did not hurt very much, but it made a great noise, and the Wheeler uttered a howl and tumbled over upon its side. The next minute it scrambled to its wheels and rolled away as fast as it could go, screeching with fear at the same time. "I told you they were harmless," began Tick-Tock, but before he could say more, another Wheeler was upon them. Crack went the dinner pail against its head, knocking its straw hat a dozen feet away, and that was enough for this Wheeler also. It rolled away after the first one, and the third did not wait to be pounded with the pail, but joined its fellows as quickly as its wheels would whirl. The yellow hen gave a cackle of delight, and flying to a perch upon Tick-Tock's shoulder, she said, "Ah, bravely done, my copper friend, and wisely thought of, too. Now we're free from those ugly creatures." But just then, a large band of Wheelers rolled from the forest, and relying upon their numbers to conquer, they advanced fiercely upon Tick-Tock. Dorothy grabbed Billina in her arms and held her tight, and the machine embraced the form of the little girl with his left arm, the better to protect her. Then the Wheelers were upon them. Rattlety, bang, bang, went the dinner pail in every direction, and it made so much clatter bumping against the heads of the Wheelers that they were much more frightened than hurt and fled in a great panic. All, that is, except their leader. This Wheeler had stumbled against another and fallen flat upon his back, and before he could get his wheels under him to rise again, Tick-Tock had fastened his copper fingers into the neck of the gorgeous jacket of his foe and held him fast. "Tell your people to go away," commanded the machine. The leader of the Wheelers hesitated to give this order, so Tick-Tock shook him as a terrier does a terrier dog does a rat, until the Wheeler's teeth rattled together with a noise like hailstones on a window pane. Then, as soon as the creature could get its breath, it shouted to the others to roll away, which they immediately did. "Now," said Tick-Tock, "you shall come with us and tell me what I want to know." "You'll be sorry for treating me in this way," whined the Wheeler. "I am a terribly fierce person." "As for that," answered Tick-Tock, "I am only a machine and cannot feel sorrow or joy, no matter what happens. But you are wrong to think yourself terrible or fierce." "Why so?" asked the Wheeler. "Because no one else thinks as you do. Your wheels make you helpless to injure anyone, for you have no fists and cannot scratch or even pull hair. Nor have you any feet to kick with. All you can do is yell and shout, and that does not hurt anyone at all." The Wheeler burst into a flood of tears, to Dorothy's great surprise. "Now I and my people are ruined forever," he sobbed. "For you have discovered our secret. Being so helpless, our only hope is to make people afraid of us by pretending we are very fierce and terrible, and writing in the sand warnings to beware the Wheelers. Until now, we have frightened everyone, but since you have discovered our weakness, our enemies will fall upon us and make us very miserable and unhappy." "Oh no!" exclaimed Dorothy, who was sorry to see this beautifully dressed Wheeler so miserable. "Well, Tick-Tock will keep your secret, and so will Billina and I. Only you must promise not to frighten children any more if they come near you." "I won't. Indeed, I won't," promised the Wheeler, ceasing to cry and becoming more cheerful. I'm really not bad, but we have to pretend to be terrible in order to prevent others from attacking us." "That is not exactly true," said Tick-Tock, starting to walk toward the path through the forest, and still holding fast to his prisoner, who rolled slowly along beside them. "You and your people are full of mischief, and like to bother those who fear you. And you are often impudent and disagreeable too. But if you will try to cure those faults, I will not tell anyone how helpless you are." "I'll try, of course," replied the Wheeler eagerly. "And thank you, Mr. Tick-Tock, for your kindness." "I am only a machine," said Tick-Tock. "I cannot be any kind more than I can be sorry or glad. I can only do what I am wound up to do." "Oh, are you wound up to keep my secret?" asked the Wheeler anxiously. "Yes, if you behave yourself. But tell me, who rules the land of Ev now?" asked the machine. Well, there is no ruler, was the answer, because every member of the royal family is imprisoned by the Gnome King. But the Princess Languidir, who is a niece of our late King Evaldo, lives in a part of the royal palace and takes as much money out of the royal treasury as she can spend. The Princess Languidir is not exactly a ruler, you see, but she doesn't rule. She is the nearest approach to a ruler we have at present. I do not remember her, said Tick-Tock. What does she look like? That I cannot say, replied the Wheeler, although I have seen her 20 times. For the Princess Languidir is a different person every time I see her, and the only way her subjects can recognize her at all is by means of a beautiful ruby key, which she always wears on a chain attached to her left wrist. When we see the key, we know we are beholding the princess. That is strange, said Dorothy in astonishment. Do you mean to say that so many different princesses are one and the same person? Not exactly, answered the Wheeler. There is, of course, but one princess, but she appears to us in many forms, which are all more or less beautiful. She must be a witch, exclaimed the girl. I do not think so, declared the Wheeler, but there is some mystery connected with her, nevertheless. She is a very vain creature, and lives mostly in her room, surrounded by mirrors, so that she can admire herself whichever way she looks. No one answered this speech, because they had just passed out of the forest, and their attention was fixed upon the scene before them. A beautiful vale, in which were many fruit trees and green fields, with pretty farmhouses scattered here and there and broad, smooth roads that led in every direction. In the center of this lovely vale, about a mile from where our friends were standing, rose the tall spires of the royal palace, which glittered brightly against their background of blue sky. The palace was surrounded by charming grounds, full of flowers and shrubbery. Several tinkling fountains could be seen, and there were pleasant walks bordered by rows of white marble statuary. All these details Dorothy was, of course, unable to notice or admire until they had advanced along the road to a position quite near to the palace, and she was still looking at the pretty sights when her little party entered the grounds and approached the big front door of the king's own apartments. To their disappointment, they found the door tightly closed. A sign was tacked to the panel, which read as follows: Owner absent. Please knock at the third door in the left wing. Now, said Tick-Tock to the captive Wheeler, you must show us the way to the left wing. Very well, agreed the prisoner. It is right around here at the right. Oh, how can the left be at the right? Demanded Dorothy, who feared the Wheeler was fooling them. Because there used to be 3 wings, and 2 were torn down, so the one on the right is the only one left. It is a trick of the Princess Languidir to prevent visitors from annoying her. Then the captive led them around to the wing, after which the machine man, having no further use for the Wheeler, permitted him to depart and rejoin his fellows. He immediately rolled away at a great pace, and was soon lost to sight. Tick-Tock now counted the doors in the wing, and knocked loudly upon the third one. It was opened by a little maid in a cap, trimmed with gay ribbons, who bowed respectfully and asked, What do you wish, good people? Are you the Princess Languidir? Asked Dorothy. No, miss, I am her servant, replied the maid. May I see the princess, please? I will tell you are here, miss, and ask her to grant you an audience, said the maid. Step in, please, and take a seat in the drawing room. So Dorothy walked in, followed closely by the machine, but as the yellow hen tried to enter after them, the little maid cried, "Shoo!" and flapped her apron in Bellina's face. "Shoo yourself," retorted the hen, drawing back in anger and ruffling up her feathers. "Haven't you any better manners than that?" "Oh, do you talk?" inquired the maid, evidently surprised. "Well, can't you hear me?" snapped Bellina. "Drop that apron, and get out of the doorway, so that I may enter with my friends." "Well, the princess won't like it," said the maid, hesitating. "Well, I don't care whether she likes it or not," replied Bellina, and fluttering her wings with a loud noise, she flew straight at the maid's face. The little servant at once ducked her head, and the hen reached Dorothy's side in safety. Very well, sighed the maid. "If you are all ruined because of this obstinate hen, don't blame me for it. It isn't safe to annoy the Princess Langwidere." Tell her we are waiting, if you please," Dorothy requested with dignity. "Bellina is my friend, and must go wherever I go." Without more words, the maid led them to a richly furnished drawing room, lighted with subdued rainbow tints that came in through beautiful stained-glass windows. "Remain here," she said. "What names shall I give the princess?" "I am Dorothy Gale of Kansas," replied the child. "And this gentleman is a machine man named Tick-Tock. And the yellow hen is my friend, Bellina." The little servant bowed and withdrew, going through several passages and mounting 2 marble stairways before she came to the apartments occupied by her mistress. I need to get comfortable. Give me just a second. Yeah, excuse me. Okay, just need to resit. Okay, excuse me. Princess Langwidere's sitting room was paneled with great mirrors, which reached from the ceiling to the floor. Also, the ceiling was composed of mirrors, and the floor was of polished silver that reflected every object upon it. So, when Langwidere sat in her easy chair and played soft melodies upon her mandolin, her form was mirrored hundreds of times, in walls and ceiling and floor, and whichever way the lady turned her head, she could see and admire her own features. This she loved to do, and just as the maid entered, she was saying to herself, "This head with the auburn hair and hazel eyes is quite attractive. I must wear it more often than I have done of late, although it may not be the best of my collection." You have company, Your Highness," announced the maid, bowing low. "Who is it?" asked Langwidere, yawning. "Dorothy Gale of Kansas, Mr. Tick-Tock, and Bellina," answered the maid. What a queer lot of names," murmured the princess, beginning to be a little interested. What are they like? Is Dorothy Gale of Kansas pretty?" "She might be called so," the maid replied. "Oh, and is Mr. Tick-Tock attractive?" continued the princess. That I cannot say, your highness. But he seems very bright. Will your gracious highness see them? Oh, well, I may as well, Nanda. But I am tired admiring this head, and if my visitor has any claims to beauty, I must take care that she does not surpass me. So I will go to my cabinet and change to number 17, which I think is my best appearance, don't you? Your number 17 is exceedingly beautiful, answered Nanda, with another bow. Again the princess yawned. Then she said, help me to rise. So the maid assisted her to gain her feet, although Langwidere was the stronger of the two, and the princess slowly walked across the silver floor to her cabinet, leaning heavily at every step upon Nanda's arm. Now, I must explain to you that Princess Langwidere had 30 heads, as many as there are days in the month, but of course she could only wear one of them at a time, because she had but one neck. These heads were kept in what she called her cabinet, which was a beautiful dressing room that lay just between Langwidere's sleeping chamber and the mirrored sitting room. Each head was in a separate cupboard lined with velvet. The cupboards ran all around the sides of the dressing room, and had elaborately carved doors with gold numbers on the outside and jewel-framed mirrors on the inside of them. When the princess got out of her crystal bed in the morning, she went to her cabinet, opened one of the velvet-lined cupboards, and took the head it contained from its golden shelf. Then, by the aid of the mirror inside the open door, she put on the head, as neat and straight as could be, and afterward called her maids to robe her for the day. She always wore a simple white costume that suited all the heads, for, being able to change her face whenever she liked, the princess had no interest in wearing a variety of gowns, as have other ladies who are compelled to wear the same face constantly. Of course, the 30 heads were in great variety, no two formed alike, but all being of exceeding loveliness. There were heads with golden hair, brown hair, rich auburn hair, and black hair, but none with gray hair. The heads had eyes of blue, of gray, of hazel, of brown, and of black, but there were no red eyes among them, and all were bright and handsome. The noses were Grecian, Roman, Retrousse, and Oriental, representing all types of beauty, and the mouths were of assorted sizes and shapes, displaying pearly teeth when the head smiled. As for dimples, they appeared in cheeks and chins, wherever they might be most charming, and one or two heads had freckles upon the faces to contrast the better with the brilliancy of their complexions. One key unlocked all the velvet cupboards containing these treasures, a curious key carved from a single blood-red ruby, and this was fastened to a strong but slender chain which the princess wore around her left wrist. When Nanda had supported Langwidere to a position in front of a cupboard number 17, the princess unlocked the door with her ruby key, and after handing head number 9, which she had been wearing, to the maid, she took number 17 from its shelf and fitted it to her neck. It had black hair and dark eyes, and a lovely pearl and white complexion. And when Langwidere wore it, she knew she was remarkably beautiful in appearance. There was only one trouble with number 17. the temper that went with it, and which was hidden somewhere under the glossy black hair. The temper was fiery, harsh, and haughty in the extreme, and it often led the princess to do unpleasant things, which she regretted when she came to wear her other heads. But she did not remember this today, and went to meet her guests in the drawing room with a feeling of certainty that which she would surprise them with her beauty. However, she was greatly disappointed to find that her visitors were merely a small girl in a gingham dress, a copper man that would only go when wound up, and a yellow hen that was sitting contentedly in Langwidier's best work-basket, where there was a china egg used for darning stockings. It may surprise you to learn that a princess ever does such a common thing as darn stockings, but if you will stop to think, you will realize that a princess is sure to wear holes in her stockings, the same as other people, only it isn't quite considered polite to mention the matter. "Oh," said Langwidier, slyly lifting the nose of number 17. "I thought someone of importance had called." "Well, then you were right," declared Dorothy. "I'm a good deal of importance myself, and when Bellina lays an egg, she has the proudest cackle you ever heard. As for Tick-Tock, he's a—" "Stop! Stop!" commanded the princess, with an angry flash of her splendid eyes. "How dare you annoy me with your senseless chatter?" "Why, you horrid thing," said Dorothy, who was not accustomed to being treated so rudely. The princess looked at her more closely. "Tell me," she resumed, "are you of royal blood?" "Better than that, ma'am," said Dorothy. "I came from Kansas." "Huh!" cried the princess scornfully. "You are a foolish child, and I cannot allow you to annoy me. Run away, you little goose, and bother someone else." Dorothy was so indignant that for a moment she could find no words to reply. But she rose from her chair and was about to leave the room when the princess, who had been scanning the girl's face, stopped her by saying, more gently, "Come nearer to me." Dorothy obeyed, without a thought of fear, and stood before the princess while Langwidier examined her face with careful attention. "You are rather attractive," said the lady presently. "Not at all beautiful, you understand. But you have a certain style of prettiness that is different from that of any of my 30 heads. So I believe I'll take your head and give you number 26 for it." "Well, I believe you won't!" exclaimed Dorothy. "It will do you no good to refuse," continued the princess, "for I need your head for my collection, and in the land of Ev my will is law. I never have cared much for number 26, and you will find that it is very little worn. Besides, it will do just as well as the one you're wearing for all practical purposes." "I don't know anything about your number 26, and I don't want to," said Dorothy firmly. "I'm not used to taking cast-off things, so I'll just keep my own head." "You refuse?" cried the princess with a frown. "Of course I do," was the reply. "Then," said Langwidier, "I shall lock you up in a tower until you decide to obey me. Nanda," turning to her maid, "call my army." Nanda rang a silver bell, and at once a big fat colonel in a bright red uniform entered the room, followed by 10 lean soldiers, who all looked sad and discouraged, and saluted the princess in a very melancholy fashion. "Carry that girl to the North Tower and lock her up," cried the princess, pointing to Dorothy. "To hear is to obey," answered the big red colonel, and caught the child by her arm. But at that moment, Tick-Tock raised his dinner pail and pounded it so forcibly against the colonel's head that the big officer sat down upon the floor with a sudden bump, looking both dazed and very much astonished. "Help!" he shouted, and the 10 lean soldiers sprang to assist their leader. There was great excitement for the next few moments, and Tick-Tock had knocked down 7 of the army, who were sprawling in every direction upon the carpet, when suddenly the machine paused, with the dinner pail raised for another blow, and remained perfectly motionless. "My action has run down," he called to Dorothy. "Wind me up, quick." She tried to obey, but the big colonel had by this time managed to get upon his feet again, so he grabbed fast hold of the girl, and she was helpless to escape. "This is too bad," said the machine. "I ought to have run 6 hours longer, but I suppose my long walk and my fight with the Wheelers made me run down faster than usual." "Well, it can't be helped," said Dorothy with a sigh. "Will you exchange heads with me?" demanded the princess. "No, indeed!" cried Dorothy. "Then lock her up," said Langwidere to her soldiers, and they led Dorothy to a high tower at the north of the palace and locked her securely within. The soldiers afterward tried to lift Tick-Tock, but they found the machine so solid and heavy that they could not stir it. So they left him standing in the center of the drawing room. Well, people will think I have a new statue," said Langwidere, "so it won't matter in the least. And Nanda can keep him well polished." "What shall we do with the hen?" asked the colonel, who had just discovered Billina in the work-basket. "Oh, put her in the chicken house," answered the princess. "Someday I'll have her fried for breakfast." "She looks rather tough, your highness," said Nanda doubtfully. "That is a base slander," cried Billina, struggling frantically in the colonel's arms. "But the breed of chickens I come from is said to be poison to all princesses." Then," remarked Langwidere, "I will not fry the hen, but keep her to lay eggs. And if she doesn't do her duty, I'll have her drowned in the horse trough." End of chapter 6. That's kind of a cliffhanger chapter, so if I leave it here, then it seems appropriate. Chapter 7 is looking kind of long too. I'm skimming through it. I don't think I have chapter 7 in me, and I'm starting to kind of wind down a bit myself, so I can, yeah, 7's kind of long anyways, so I'm gonna leave it here for today. I've been like stumbling on my words a bit anyways, which is part of the game, is to, it's one thing when you listen to audiobooks, they have the luxury of like editing things out. They can, if they mess up a take, they can just rewind tape and start over. But anyways, so doing it live is a whole other trick. I've done it before though, so getting better. Today was definitely an improvement over the last time. But yeah, I'm about done for today anyways, so that'll do it for now. And then next time, so there, Dorothy is locked in the tower, and Tick-Tock's down in the waiting room, and then poor Billina's getting tossed into the chicken coop. So that seems like a good spot to end it for now. And I changed the sleep timer on my PlayStation, so we should be just fine. Yep, still just standing there looking at the house. I almost generated a new world. I'm probably going to do that this weekend, because weekends for me right now are kind of boring and unpleasant, and I just kind of wait for them to be over just because of my situation right now, which is fine. Weekdays are when I kind of have a bit more free time, weekends. Anyways, so maybe this weekend I'll generate a new world, and I was thinking about building, just whatever, maybe a castle. So yeah, that'll do it for today. Anyways, cool. I enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, and have a good one. I'll be back whenever. I'll probably be back next week. So that was 2 days this week. 2 days is pretty good. Maybe 3 days next week. I don't know. I definitely went longer than today, but it seems like no matter what I have in mind, I usually end up reading about 2 hours. So, cool. Anyways, take care. Have a good one, and see you around.